Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tom Sparough, and I am going to be sharing with you about wisdom ghost stories. Now, I have to admit that this is a kind of fringe topic in organizational storytelling. And let me just say very briefly how I came upon it. I've been very active in the organizational storytelling world here in the United States. I've been chair of the National Storytelling Network Special Interest Group on storytelling in organization. And I was thinking that there was perhaps some contribution that I could make to the field. And one of the things I had noticed was going to actual storytelling festivals that weren't about organizational storytelling per se or exactly. They were just any type of storytelling. And ghost storytelling was always very popular. People were just attracted to ghost stories. And I noticed that as organizational storytelling took hold in corporate, governmental, education offices, ghost storytelling wasn't part of it. And I thought, I wonder if there could be some ghost stories that would be appropriate for organizational storytelling times. And as I thought about that, some stories started to occur to me. So I wrote a collection of stories for organizations that are ghost stories. And as I start right now, I would like to share a first story with you. And this is on a topic that is really important in organizational work. It's this topic of meeting deadlines. And after I share this brief introductory story, we're going to talk about how all this fits together, what are the steps, how would it be processed, how is it valuable. But I thought it would be good to actually share a story with you. And I love to share the stories. I'm going to take my slide down so you can just see me to share the story. Okay, here we go. Deadline. Trisha had the words of her boss echoing in her mind. If you are late with one more project this month, even 1 minute late, you will be fired. She was in the office long after everyone else had left. She was working furiously on her property analysis report. She had an absolute deadline of 11 p.m. and she was getting very close to the deadline, but she was almost done with the report. She would not be late, not with this project, no way. She just had 3 more minutes to finish. She was almost completed. She had things in this presentation that other people would not have thought of. Her report was like no other, and that's why she was there long after everyone else had left. But the fact was, she was not alone. Brent had come into the building, as was his custom late at night. Ever since he had been fired, he was not allowed in the building. But no locked door could keep him away. He would come into the building and lurk. He would look through people's desks to find something to amuse him, perhaps a cautionary memo from a boss indicating that that person was having problems at work. Now Brent came to the big room with the cubicles, more than 50 cubicles, and he saw that there was a light on in one of them. He went towards that light. Trisha was in that cubicle, working furiously. She had to finish her report. Okay, now it's done. All she had to do was proofread it, and then she could send it, and she would be on time. She only had 90 seconds left. She was racing through reading this. Brent saw Trisha there. He was only half there, but he understood that she must be trying to finish a report to send by the 11 p.m. deadline. He went down on the floor and began to slither toward her. Trisha was reading. She had no idea that Brent was there. He made not a sound because the dead cannot be heard by the living. Now he was underneath her chair, and Brent reached out and touched one of Trisha's legs. She jumped. What was that? It was a cold spot on her leg, but she could not leave. She could not lose her concentration. She had to send this. Good, she was done. She was ready to send. Brent saw something more interesting than Trisha's legs, and he reached out and he pulled the power cord from her computer out of its socket, and suddenly the screen went blank, and Trisha said, no, what's going on? No, this isn't happening. No, she hit a key, a random key. No, she saw that the cord was out. Oh, crap. She plugged it back in. Slowly, her screen came back to life. Her desktop came up. The document wasn't on the desktop. She located the file. She sent it immediately. She didn't check to see if her changes were saved. She looked at the clock. It was 11:02. She put on her coat, got her purse. No matter what people said about her boss, she knew that he always kept his word. She would be fired. She walked out of her cubicle and a sudden chill came across her, but then it was gone. And she made her way to the elevator and pushed the button to go down. Brent stood there in the entranceway of her cubicle. He had the biggest smile when Trisha had walked through him. And now Brent turned to her as she was entering the elevator and he waved goodbye. Trisha had made his night. This is an example story, and I want to talk a bit about it with you now. There's a certain way that I like to process these stories, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But I want to share with you that there is a wider umbrella that this story fits into. And I call it generative storytelling. And it's really pretty simple, and it's certainly not limited to ghost stories. But when we share a story with a group of people, or we read a story for self-reflection, it's a generative story if the reason why we're doing that is to create a mind shift or an attitude change, and then thus bring about behavioral change. So in the story that we're talking about, Deadline, if we have people on our team or ourselves find ourselves chronically missing deadlines, always being late, we know that this is a problem. And it's sometimes very difficult to to be direct with this and be effective. Because what might happen is that people could be obedient, but not buy into it. So their obedience is not authentic. So what we want is for them genuinely to look at themselves or myself and see why I might change. And we need a kind of safe way to do that. And generative storytelling creates that safe way. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute, but I want to just say a few things about ghost stories and why they're appropriate for this generative storytelling. The life-threatening moments really grab our attention. So if we want to share a story that's going to draw people in, ghost storytelling can be very effective. Literally, they can be life and death moments. And you don't have to take my word for this. Books, movies, television, they're filled with these moments that get at somebody being threatened. And when that happens, we have like our survival instincts kick in, and we want to find out what happens. So ghost storytelling taps into this natural, intrinsic motivation to find out what's going to happen, how can I get through this? And so I think in that way, ghost storytelling is very appropriate and effective. When I talk about a safe space story, I want to just share with you one perspective. This is not the only perspective, but it's one that's appropriate for what I'm talking about right here. And that is, when you have a story that's not about somebody that you know, or not about yourself, not about anybody that your team knows, a fictional story, but not necessarily fictional. When you have a story like that, people are less judgmental and less comparing. They enter into the suspension of disbelief. Opposed to when you take an example story of a team member who's done something really good, or if you had an example of a story of somebody who's done something poorly, and you bring it up to everyone, immediately people are into judgment mode. So they don't so easily enter into the story as they do to their analysis of the story. Is this accurate? Is this person really like this? Or they start comparing, well, what about me? I've done good things as well, or I've done bad things as well. So there's this comparisons that go on when we tell stories that are actual about the people we know. I'm not saying don't ever tell stories about people we know. That's really important and it can be very valuable. But I want to bring up this perspective that it cannot be safe and it can bring people in to judgments and comparisons very easily. So that's one of the values of these other kinds of generative stories that are not about the people we know. So here's the 3 simple steps for generative storytelling. And the first thing is you find a topic that you want to talk about, like, are people procrastinating and missing deadlines? Or are people not following through and actually finishing their work? Is there a lack of persistence? Is there a lack of teamwork? And then you locate a story. I've thought about this, and my collection of ghost stories covers 26 different topics. And then I have an index in there, so somebody could look through the index, find a topic that they're interested in, and then share the story, either personally just by themselves or with the team. It could be read out loud, but you share the story. The second step is that you analyze the story. And this is part of the safety setup of the story, which is when you are just talking about the story, it's safe to talk about procrastination. It's safe to talk about missing deadlines because you're not talking about somebody you actually know. You're talking about the concept. So this can be very helpful when you're trying to get at how do we make our deadlines. You do it in a removed setting, which is this story and the characters in this story. So you process it in that way. And then if you feel your people can handle it or you can handle it, you go to that third stage, which is taking it personally. So a great question that I like is, what about this story is reflective of my own life or career or my work setting? You know, what about this story is accurate to my own life or work? Or what does it remind me of? What is this story about for me, and how am I living it out? And then you get to people, even if they can't immediately find the answer to that, they start thinking about what matters to them. And they can come up with a mind shift, a heart shift, and an action shift through powerful questions. These can be very life-giving stories, but I'm going to come back to this slide in a moment because I want to share a second story for us here in my brief amount of time. And this story is called Stage Fright. Once again, I'm going to turn off the slideshow. And many of us have presentations that we get nervous for. And this is a story to help us reflect on that. John Zulowski stood backstage, and his time to share his presentation was drawing near, and he was finding himself very nervous and very worried when he heard a closet door backstage open up. He turned towards the noise and he saw a door opening and a red light emanating from a closet, and there were some microphone stands and some wires hanging up. And then a man came out of that closet. He was very short and very wide. And he looked at John and he said, "You've got a presentation coming up, don't you?" And John said, "Yes." And he said, "And you're worried about it. You're very worried, aren't you? I can see it on your face." John said, "Yes." And the man said, "Well, you want to see something that you'll never forget?" And John said, "No, I need to concentrate on my presentation." And the man said, "Oh, you won't want to miss this." And he lurched forward and he grabbed him by the wrist and he pulled him into the closet and shut the door, and the red light went off and John was in the darkness, and the man said in his ear, "My name is Nick, and I'm going to need you to shut your eyes." Nick was not, John was not about to shut his eyes, but he blinked and he saw a flash of white light, and he blinked again and saw that light. So he did close his eyes, and suddenly he saw himself. He was looking at himself on the stage with the light shining toward him, and he was silent, and he said, I seem to have forgotten what I was going to say. I can't remember what I was going to say." And now he heard laughter. He looked out in the audience and he saw people laughing at him, slapping their knees, chuckling. They're all laughing at him. And then he was back in the closet. It was totally dark. He needed to get out of this closet. He took a step forward and another, but he couldn't find the door. He couldn't find the wall. He was in an expansive black room, but he heard Nick's voice again. Go ahead. Shut your eyes. I have more to show you. And John, more out of fear than obedience, shut his eyes again, and he saw himself back on the stage, the lights coming down, and now he was pointing up to a slide. He said, this is a very important image. Take a look at it. Try to understand it. And then he looked out at the audience, and he saw that people were sleeping, and the sound of snoring filled the theater. Everyone was But then he saw someone in the front row. The person was not snoring. Their eyes were open. Their mouth was open. They had died. Literally, his PowerPoint presentation had killed them. And now John's eyes saw the darkness again. He was back in the closet. He couldn't get out of the closet, and Nick's voice came through again. Choose. And John said, choose what? And Nick said, choose your destiny between triumph or failure. What do you want to have happen? And John said, what choice do I have? And Nick said, you have no choice because you've chosen fear. You've made your choice. So now let's see something really scary. And in the blackness of the closet, John now saw himself silently on the stage. But then he saw above the theater outside a meteor coming toward the theater complex and then crashing into the ceiling, breaking through into the interior, a fireball moving through the audience, coming right onto the stage and engulfing him. And now the red light of the closet came back on, and the door opened, and there was no sign of Nick. And John staggered out of the closet. He made his way over to the curtain. He saw that the VP of tech support was finishing, moving toward the end of her presentation. He would be next. John leaned against the backstage wall, and there was a photo of the man who had pulled him into the closet, and underneath it, it said, in memory of Nick Garland, stage manager for 16 years. And then a quote, prepare for your moment, then choose your destiny. Imagine what you want to have happen on stage. John reread this. Prepare for your moment, choose your destiny. Imagine what you want to have happen on stage. And then John closed his eyes. He imagined what he wanted to have happen in his presentation. And this is our story of stage fright. Many of us do indeed get quite worried before a presentation, and I have nervousness as well. It's an important thing to talk about. I mean, because whether it's a sales meeting that's really important to us, whether it's a conference that we have a chance to share a presentation, whether it's one of our internal meetings, people get nervous, and nervousness can be debilitating. Of course, nervousness is also a sign that we have energy. and energy is really important to do well. So I love that little story to try to break open. If we take the 3 steps, the first thing is we've shared the story. The second thing is we talk about, yes, we talk about these feelings that we have before a presentation, and think about it in terms of what John was going through and what his fears were. And then we move it into that third stage of looking at it personally and what's it about for me. I could process that a little bit, but I want to share just a little bit more about why I think these ghost stories and generative storytelling is so important. I would like my work to be vibrant and life-giving. And I know there are days that I just have to do the work and it's kind of drudgery and it's a real challenge. But there's other days that are so fulfilling and so exciting. What I'm getting at with these stories is how we cannot be the working dead. And that's people who aren't enjoying their work. They're just working for a paycheck. And I meet people like this all the time who hate their work, who hate their boss, who hate their team, hate their clients. It's like, find a better way. How can you make your life, your work, be in sync with each other and find value in that? Obviously, sometimes we can share this with the people that we work with, and some of these things we can't because we might be fired. So you have to find which stories can be brought to a team, which stories are best just internally, self-reflection. There's this other aspect, moving towards closing here, I want to mention, and that is many of us have personal stories about the dead. And I want to just very briefly say that my mother was very influential to me in my life, and she died a number of years ago. But when I was trying to decide things, I would often talk it over with her. And I was at an impasse not long ago. And I was thinking maybe I wasn't good enough to do some of the things that I had ideas for. And I just had my mother come to mind. And, I said to her in my imagination, well, what should I do? What advice do you have for me? And she said, I just had this kind of voice, her voice, come into my head, and she said, "Hold up straight, Thomas. Hold up straight." And that's something she would tell me, when I was slouching. She'd say, "Hold up straight." But it meant something more to me in this moment. It was, be proud of the work that you've done, hold your head up high. You have something of value. This is a story that I share with you because all of us have these stories, and we need to find ways to get at what's in our heart, what's in our mind, make our behavioral changes, and make those attitude shifts that really affect us. I am actually J. Thomas Sparough, and the book that I wrote is Mr. Baitenswitch, Ghost Stories to Keep You and Your Organization Alive. It hasn't been translated yet into Russian, but the English version is available throughout the world on Amazon. My website is spacepainter.com. And I have another website, creative-retreat.net. The kinds of things that I generally do are sharing of story and facilitating people's stories that come from these topics, which there's a wide variety of organizational topics in terms of persistence, in terms of resilience, finding ways to have teamwork, finding work life, home life balance. These are some of the topic areas that I'm interested in. Authenticity, truthfulness, those are a few. If you email me at tom@spacepainter.com, which you can see down here, if you do email me, I would send you a PDF of the 2 ghost stories that I shared. I did a kind of shortened version today, but if you'd like those, email me at tom@spacepainter.com and I'll send you the PDF of those. It's been really great to be with you today. I hope your life and your work are what you want them to be. Imagine yourself succeeding. Hold up straight and meet your deadlines. Thank you, and have a great rest of your webinar.